Yang berbahagia Profesor Mohamad American as coordinator, members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum, and a very good morning to everyone. Firstly, I would like to say thank you very much to Professor Mohamad American for his very kind words about me. Sometimes when people talk about me, I couldn't recognize the person. It seems so different from what I know about myself. Anyway, I would like to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me once again to speak on a topic that is very relevant to this country, Malaysia, because Malaysia is a federation. Permit me to go back into history and try and understand the formation of states. States were formed basically from tribal groupings based on strong families, etc., coming together through marriages and interaction, including through wars. The dominant person would oversee the community, and this community would become small states, which over time would grow through conquest, through marriages, and through other ethnic or similarities and languages. But the states were never very big. And the Malay states, of course, were formed in this way. But other countries also started off as states. A good example would be Italy, where there were many Italian states or Roman states, but when Garibaldi emerged as a great leader, he practically conquered all the states and forced them to become a union. So in that case, Italy did not become a federal state, but a union. Although there is retention of the identities of the original states which came together to form the Italian nation. In many other countries, of course, the beginning has always been as small states, and when there is a powerful leader coming from any one of the states, then there is an attempt to bring together all the states in the form of a union or a federation. The United States, of course, is one of the best examples of federation, where the power is shared between the central government, the federal government, and the state governments. Of course, in America, the states exercise more power than we see in many other countries. Now, Malaysia became a federation simply because when the Malay states decided to accept British rule, basically, although they came through treaties where they were supposed to advise the Malay governments on how to run their country, their states, but instead the British exercised more than what they were intended to do, and they formed the first federation in Malaysia. The four states came together under British rule to form the Federated Malay States. This included, of course, Perak, Pahang, Negeri Sembilan, and Selangor, 4 states. In these 4 states, much of the administration was centralized, and the capital was Kuala Lumpur, and most of the administrative work spins around Kuala Lumpur. The British desired to make all the states, all the Malay states, into members of the federation. But the 5 other Malay states rejected totally the British proposal to federate. and form a 9-state federation. Even when the British proposed to have a customs union and a postal union, this was rejected by the 5 Malay states consisting of Johor, Kedah, Perlis, Terengganu and Kelantan. These 5 states wanted to remain separate, wanted to have more autonomy for themselves, simply because they saw what was happening in the federation, where the sultans and the administrators, mostly all of them were Malays, were not given the same authority as the British supervisors or heads of different departments. So they didn't want to have anything to do with a federation of the Malay states. Indeed, Kedah, for example, had its own police force and had its own police depot to train the police force of Kedah. It even had its own police band, as separate from the band belonging to the federal police. However, the feeling on the ground was that there was a need for some kind of identification of the Malay states as being of one country, because they were inhabited by practically the same people. When Japan invaded Malaysia and the British were forced to retreat, for a long time there was no thought about recovering from the Japanese occupation. There was a kind of feeling that the Japanese would be here for a long time. But obviously the British themselves felt that they would be able to return and reconquer the Malay states. And because of that, they decided in England, in London, in the colonial office, in fact, to design a new government for the Malay states. Because there were so many governments in the Malay states, it was very cumbersome, difficult to administer Malaysia. There were actually 7 governments, 5 for the 5 Malay states, 1 for the Federation, 6, and a separate state for Penang, Malacca and Singapore. So there were 7 governments altogether. Obviously not a very good arrangement for a relatively small country like the Malay Peninsula, with at that time a population of less than 5 million, and yet it has 7 governments. So the British, during the wartime, when they were still unable to reconquer, they already started to plan the new government for the Malay states. And in their scheme of things, they want to have only one government, or at most 2 governments. One government governing the peninsula, Penang and Malacca, and another government to govern only Singapore. Singapore being a very important naval base, and the British would not like to have interference in the governance of Singapore, which may affect the efficiency of the naval base in Singapore. So while the war was still on, while the Japanese still occupied Malaysia, the British planned a unitary state, not a federal state, a unitary state to be called the Malayan Union. Of course, after the war, they came back and they brought up this proposal, and they intended to force the Malay states to accept union of the Malay states to form the Malayan Union. As we all know, there were protests, and eventually the British had to give up on uniting the Malay states into one single country. They went back to the idea of federation, and in 1948, 2 years after the Malayan Union was formed, the British decided to dump the Malayan Union and recreate a federation of Malay states, a federation of Malaya at that time. And that was when all the states of Malaysia, including the colonies of Penang and Malacca, were brought together under a federation, the Federation of Malaya. And the local people accepted this because they too felt that it was inefficient to have too many states with too many governments. So the local nationalists at that time did not object to a federation, but objected only to British colonizing the Malay state. They wanted freedom, but in the free Malaya at that time, it should be run as a federation. Now this was important because each Malay state had its own rulers, its own sultans or rajas. And obviously, if the whole country is made into one union, the position of the rajas as heads of their state would be much diminished. In fact, when the Malayan Union was proposed, the role of the Malay sultans was relegated to that of becoming the chief qadi, in charge of the Islamic religion, as well as the Malay customs and practices, the Malay adat. They were just to be confined to that. And obviously, this was a very severe demotion for them. So even though they would like to bring all the Malay states together, they would not like to bring it into one single union where their position would be affected. So they agreed with the people that the new entity would be a federation of Malay states together with Penang and Malacca.